Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Matt Theurer, CEO and co-founder of HyperSpectral, an AI-powered spectral intelligence solution that's raised $8.5 million in funding. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to be on it.
No problem. I'm super excited as well. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So talk to us about what you're building today and over there at HyperSpectral.
Sure. So we are combining artificial intelligence along with spectroscopy to basically rapidly identify the presence of unwanted, I'm going to use the word things, inside of substances, right? So to be a little more specific, we're starting off by looking for the presence of pathogens inside of the food system, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure everybody here has probably read or seen or perhaps even affected by some of the food recalls, which seem to be accelerating due to Listeria contamination or E. coli or Salmonella. What we're trying to do is make that a rapid, cost-effective screening solution so that these contaminated foods actually never leave the factory, as opposed to making out into the real world. Current methodologies are slow and expensive, and we're trying to make them inexpensive and fast.
It seems like a very niche problem. What were you doing in your life that you were able to observe this was a problem that you needed to go out and solve using technology?
Well, what really inspired it was the pandemic, quite honestly. I'm sure everybody remembers, waiting for hours to get a swab shoved up their nose to find out 3 days later that, hey, you were fine 3 days ago, but it told you nothing about how you were at that point in time. And that did not strike me as the most efficient and effective way to find a pathogen. And honestly, food uses pretty much the same techniques that are used to detect the presence of a bacterial infection or a viral infection inside of a human being, right? Typically it's PCR. There's some swabbing going on, there's growth, and then, they find the bacteria. And since it's very closely related to human health, these bacteria that affect food are actually a problem quite often in human health, especially in wounds. So E. coli is a problem in human health. In fact, and Staph aureus, is another one that actually people think about as a human health problem, but actually Staph aureus is a problem in the food system as well, right? It causes gastrointestinal problems as a food poisoning. So there's so much crossover, and we're trying to find, again, pathogens, right? Food is the initial use case, but as I said, it applies to human beings, applies to water systems. There's a lot of uses for this technology beyond this initial use case. Just food. The food use case as a beachhead market is very viable because of lighter regulatory requirements as opposed to going in and saying, here's a test for Staph aureus or something inside of human health. That said, we've done a lot of work with human use cases. In fact, we can tell the difference between antibiotic-resistant staph, antibiotic-susceptible staph, purely based off of its interaction with light.
Can you go ahead and take us back to the early days? When you have this idea, you observe this problem during the pandemic, where do you even begin?
So we really began with, we're thinking about the problem, right? And we're like, okay, this doesn't work, doesn't get people back into the office, kids back into school. Is there a way to solve this using non-traditional methods, right? So we started looking around for, what are techniques people have used to find bacteria or viruses? I actually found a paper from the 1890s. Yes, the 1890s. On using spectroscopy to identify bacteria. So the thought is not new. What has changed in the 130 years since somebody came up with this idea back then is the cost of data acquisition, the sensors, basically the capabilities of the hardware. But more importantly, artificial intelligence has come along. Spectroscopy has traditionally been limited to the lab where you get very pure samples. I'm sure you can imagine samples in the real world are not so clean. I'm sure you can imagine there's a lot of other stuff in the nasal swab than COVID virus. There's a lot of other stuff, if you're looking at the food prep zones in a food processing. So there's a lot of other stuff there. And, viruses or bacteria, I should say, obviously very small. They have very faint signatures. And artificial intelligence allows us to process the data and find these very faint signals within the data. And that's what's really changed and made this possible for us to do it. So it was really us, honestly, a bunch of not doctors, not microbiologists, but physicists and technology, computer folks, computer scientists thinking, maybe we can try to solve this problem, right? So we were not burdened, shall we say, with an abundance of preconceived notions.
A book I really like is called The Outsiders. And I think Bill Ackman had talked about it in an interview at one point. And it goes through, I think it's 8 CEOs who, came into a company. They had never worked in that industry before, and they just, dominated as leaders. And I think the whole point of it was, being an outsider is sometimes a major advantage. So it sounds like that could be the case here with you as well.
It absolutely is. And I was just sitting in a product review process yesterday, actually, in fact, which I love to do, where I basically have people take us, from step one of the process all the way through, and you ask questions that people who worked in the field, may not ask because they've been told that's the way it's done. This is the way you do it. And you start asking questions of, well, why, when our goal is X and we're adapting a technology that maybe has goal Y, why are we taking this step here? Because it's not necessary, right? And exactly, being the outsider allows you to ask questions that people perhaps in the field would be afraid to ask because they may think it's dumb or it's going to be looked down upon, or it's just the way it's always done, right? And it's actually become a competitive advantage for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that tracks very well what a lot of other founders have told me as well, who are in similar positions, obviously in different industries. Let's talk about the market category. So I'd introduced you as an AI-powered spectral intelligence solution. Is spectral intelligence the market category, or what is the market category?
So that's the category. We're trying to be a category creator here, to be perfectly honest. And yes, so the whole idea here is to leverage spectral data, the way everything in the world, right, all matter interacts with the electromagnetic spectrum, and use it to extract information and intelligence that can be to solve these real world problems. Hey, I can find a pathogen inside of food or inside of a human being very quickly, or I can use spectroscopy to do materials provenance. I can, ensure that this substance is what it's supposed to be and it's coming from where it's supposed to be. So when you have this ground truth, right, that you cannot deny the physics, right? Leaves are green because of chlorophyll, right? You can't deny that, right? So the spectroscopy it's true, right? It's a fundamental fact. When you apply AI to that, and then you tie that into other data sources. So for instance, if you're looking in the food world, the problem is not just, hey, do I have listeria in my ice cream? It's why am I getting listeria in my ice cream? So you start to tie this scientific data into other data sources around, well, hey, generally speaking, we start to have this problem when we get a shipment from this dairy, or when Joe Smith is working, we seem to have these problems start to show up, right? So you start to not only identify the what, but you start to figure out the why and the how things are happening. And that's what we're referring to as spectral intelligence, right? It's combining the scientific data with other sources of data to, again, not just understand the what's happening, but the how and the why.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. Can you paint a picture for us of who the typical customers are and who's buying the solution?
Sure. So in the world of food, a typical customer would be either a food safety lab or, say, a medium to large size food processor / producer who basically has to ensure that their product is safe and ready to ship, right? So, we would typically talk to the safety manager within a company that produces food. In the world of medical, and again, we're getting ready to start some clinical trials in our ability to detect MRSA and MSSA. There we're typically talking to, right now, it would be the head of innovation within a healthcare system, but you're really talking about hospitals, clinics, any place where a patient needs to go in and, be rapidly screened for the presence of a pathogen. We do have contracts right now with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, where we're applying our technology and our artificial intelligence layer to the problem of materials provenance, right? Which is a secure supply chain, a problem where, again, is this substance that we're looking at, is it really what it says it is, right? And is it coming from where it's supposed to be coming from? Because you can actually detect in a lot of substances, you can actually pick up trace responses that say, hey, everything that comes from, Arizona or Wyoming tends to show these signatures. So we can say, hey, it really is coming from Arizona, not from someplace else. Right. So there's so many use cases for the technology because the skill, the value here is in the artificial intelligence layer, the building of the AI engines, which know how to analyze this data and solve the problems. The hardware we're actually agnostic to. We work with or can work with almost any spectrophotometer or source of spectral data out there and all of its many, many types of spectroscopy that exist. For us, the value is in that software, back-end software platform.
One thing that I've seen from the founders that I work with is, when you have a technology that has many different use cases, it can be almost overwhelming because it's hard to know where to focus and where to prioritize efforts in terms of sales, marketing, go to market. How have you thought about how to prioritize use cases when there are so many different use cases for what's possible?
I will tell you this, I think about this every single day, right? Multiple times a day. And it is quite honestly one of the things that keeps me up at night, right? Is how do we maintain the focus as a company to ensure that, we allocate and use our resources wisely to, grow the company. So we look at a bunch of things, right? I mean, obviously there's the traditional, you look at the TAM, right? You look at the SAM, you look at the cost of customer acquisition, you look at all the potential barriers to entry as well as the accelerants to entry, right? I talked a little bit in the beginning about food versus testing humans. Again, the bacteria quite often are the same thing, right? Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, Staph aureus, tuberculosis, right? Tuberculosis doesn't really affect food, but you have these bacteria that cross over, but you've got a massive regulatory hurdle in human health, right? In terms of you've got to get FDA approval, not required in the world of food safety testing. So you basically just have to sit down and do the analysis, right? And from a food perspective, the rate and increase of recalls is incredible. It's accelerating. And honestly, you do a bunch of customer outreach, right? You go out, you talk to people. We spend a lot of time talking to growers, food producers, everywhere, literally from the farmer to the restaurants and the grocery stores. And every single point in that supply chain, we were told, this is a big problem. We need a solution, right? So it became abundantly obvious to us that was the right way to go. It's a lot of grunt work, quite honestly, a lot of talking to people and asking them what they need and is there a problem to solve. One of my mantras, having spent 30 years in technology, is I love tech. Tech is great. It's wonderful. But if it doesn't solve a problem, then it's useless. And technology for technology's sake will never be successful. It's got to solve a problem somebody has, right? So, we found that problem. And then, we're moving on to the next place where we've said, hey, what if we could, instead of it taking 3 days to actually figure out what bacteria is infecting a wound and whether it's antibiotic resistant or not, what if we could tell you that in an hour or 2 hours? And the doctors and the hospitals and the clinics are, yes, please, that's a problem for us. Right. So it's really all about doing the grunt work to find the problem to solve and seeing if your technology can address it.
That's the answer everyone knows is the case, but no one wants that to be the answer, right? Just all the grunt work.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, this is the 5th company that I have been involved in, from a startup perspective. And for every moment of glory, there's 40 hours of grunt work of just putting in the labor and the sweat to get there. But those moments of glory are pretty sweet, right? They make those 40 hours of grunt work worth it.
I don't know if you've seen that meme, but it's like, what my mom thinks I do. And it's, you on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt or, being on TV and like, what I actually do. And it's like the grunt work that's ugly and, no one wants to talk about it, but it's
exactly. I get to my brothers and sisters, oh, hey, saw you were on a podcast or you're mentioned in an article and wow. And I'm like, that's great. You're lucky. I'm like, yes, I'm very, very lucky. but you're ignoring the 80 hours a week I've been doing for 30 years.
Yeah, that's what gets missed, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I'm not complaining about it at all.
Yeah. Anyone who signs up to be a founder, they know what they're getting into, I think. And if they don't, then they typically don't last. If they're not prepared for the grind, the pain, the grunt work. That's part of the job.
It is. And, just on a quick side note, what I related to that, when I started my first company, I had no idea what I was doing, just not a clue. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form prepared for it. But I love what I see coming out of universities now, where they have these ecosystems they build, teaching students, what it takes to really be an entrepreneur. The entrepreneurship programs that I've seen at MIT, at Stanford, and I actually just spoke at one down at Virginia Tech a couple of weeks ago. It's fantastic, right? Because it really prepares kids coming out of college, and in some cases, while they're still in college, to really do this work. And man, I wish that had been available for me back in the Stone Age when I was still in school. It's great.
I think about that a lot. I started my first company in 2008. So I'm a little bit younger than you, I think, but I also have that same reflection. I think yours probably goes a bit deeper, but I think the same thing now. I see all the resources, like even if you just look on like podcasts like this, if you look at YouTube, like all of the resources out there about company building that exist, I feel like practically nothing existed when I was starting. And if I feel that way, then I'm sure you really feel that way.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up podcasts and YouTube, these podcasts like we're on now. And again, all the videos, that just the wealth of information and mentorship and guidance is really refreshing.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
Yeah, I watched it years ago. I think it would have been like 2015, but Stanford did a course on blitz scaling. It was taught by Reid Hoffman. It had Marissa Mayer, Sam Altman, all the big names came in and gave lectures. I remember just watching that on YouTube and just thinking like, how awesome is this? I didn't go to Stanford, but I'm sitting here doing like, an amazing course from some of the most amazing people in tech. It's amazing that it's just out there for everyone to consume if they want to consume it.
It is. It is absolutely mind-boggling. And then, yes, the fact that we can get access to those kind of resources, which historically were inside their somewhat insulated communities and hard to get a hold of. So yeah, it's refreshing.
Yeah, totally agree there. Let's go back a little bit. I want to ask about DARPA and winning government contracts. So a lot of founders I talk to, they're open to that idea now more than they were 5 years ago. There's a lot of defense companies now that I'm speaking to. So it seems like Silicon Valley or just tech as a whole is becoming more open to really partnering with the government and supporting the government. Can you tell us a little bit about your process of winning contracts or securing these grants and talk us through what you've learned?
Yeah, sure. I'll say this. I still learn more about that every single day. It's really interesting. Programs within the federal government, whether you're talking about DARPA, there's another one called BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority. There's ARPA-H, which is the Advanced Research Project Agency -H for Health. There's all these massive programs, and they all have initially would seem to be kind of like overlapping mandates. But, when you really dive into it, there's some difference. So there's some, what can be subtle, but pretty significant differences, in the end when you get to it. So you look at like an ARPA, and those are like, they're looking for moonshot ideas, right? And, again, I wish I could say there's the magic Staples easy button. There's not. It's a lot of grunt work. It's finding the program managers, doing the research to see what the individual program managers are interested in, what, their efforts are. In a lot of ways, it's like pitching to a VC. Here's my idea. Give me 60 seconds or 5 minutes, or if you're really lucky, you'll get half an hour meeting, and you really kind of pitch them on the idea of what it is that you're trying to solve and how it can address their problem. BARDA, something like BARDA, which is not the moonshot ideas, they actually put out announcements, right? What they call BAAs. So anybody's interested in this, you want to subscribe to the BAAs, and you can get automatic feeds. That'll tell you exactly what it is they're looking for. And, we'll read these 300 pages of things BARDA wants to solve, and we'll find, 1 or 2 where we think our technology can apply, right? And again, then you start looking into doing the market research. hey, it's great BARDA wants this, but is there a commercially viable solution out of it? Or is it, the government wants something to be able to detect anthrax? Not saying finding anthrax is not important, saying it's not necessarily a commercially viable, outside of the government. So you have to go through all of that again. And then inside of something like a DARPA, which is kind of somewhere in the middle between ARPA and BARDA, again, it's talking to the program managers. And again, this is all publicly available information. They publish the things that they're interested in, and you basically pitch them just like you pitch a customer or you pitch a VC, quite honestly.
What's been your most painful or maybe difficult learning when it comes to landing government contracts?
I'd say the most difficult thing in landing a government contract, I'm going to say it's the speed at which they move. And until you get that signed piece of paperwork, you are extremely subject to the political winds on Capitol Hill. Put it that way. So, what's important to, say, one administration is not important to another administration. And, for better or worse, you have to play the political game a little bit, right? And if your congressman's interested in or your senator's interested in, and you're in their state, that's going to help you a little bit, right? But that's the most frustrating part, I'd say, of getting government contracts is, trying to get it done while the budget's been approved, right?
Yeah.
And, hopefully you're not on a continuing resolution or something like that. That's the frustrating part of it. I mean, the people we work with could not be any nicer or more qualified for their jobs. They're absolutely rock stars. And they, a lot of them get just as frustrated, right, in trying to get their missions done. So, yeah, that's really probably the frustration.
If company building isn't hard enough, then you also have to navigate the political world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You must like pain, as we talked about it. It seems like you like this stuff. You like the hard stuff.
I do. I started off, for me, my philosophies in wanting to do with my career is I look for technologies that I think are going to fundamentally shake up the areas in which they're applied, right? And that sounds like an awful lot of hubris, and I don't mean it to be. But, I started off, I was very early adopter of Microsoft technology back in the early 90s, back when Microsoft operating systems were not considered suitable, generally speaking, for the enterprise. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, I think they can do it. I got a lot of work to do, but yeah, they're going to fundamentally change things, right? PCs are going to knock out mainframes, and Microsoft's got the right approach, right, to getting PCs to spread. Luckily, I was right, and then I moved into virtualization when I found a little company called VMware back when they were really little. And the company I started at that point was their first authorized consultant company and partner. We built an entire practice around working with VMware, which many people probably, unless they're inside of the computer world, may not have heard of them, but they are, the technology they developed is the reason cloud computing exists, right? And I kind of moved into the world of cloud computing. And then I looked at, I left the company I started, exited the EMC. EMC got bought by Dell. We were part of Dell. I was kind of burned out, been 25 years of nonstop. And I decided to look around again and say, hey, what's going to change things, right? And I'm like, hey, it's artificial intelligence, right? And it's not that AI was new. AI has been around theoretically since the 1950s, 1960s, but you've got a bunch of things coming together. Massive amounts of compute available on all these cloud platforms. High bandwidth, low latency connectivities, move massive amounts of data around from the edge back to the central computing and back to the edge again, which is really necessary to affect things in the field. And I'm like, all right, AI is going to have its day. And again, luckily, knock on wood, I was right. So for me, it's all about looking for something that's going to really change the world, if you will. Again, that sounds really grandiose and I don't need it to be. But that's what I try to look for.
Final question for you before we wrap up here. What's the 3 to 5 year vision look like?
So the 3 to 5 year vision is to expand, not only in the food market and the human health market. There's a lot of use cases, moving into adjacent markets such as quality assurance, quality control, again, materials provenance. Again, we're trying to make this concept of spectral intelligence very broad and ubiquitous. So what we're looking for are not only hardware partners, but people out there who said, hey, I've got a problem. Okay. I need to solve for whatever it is. Hey, maybe it's contaminants in heavy machinery, right? Oil and coolants and fuel? I don't know, but we want to give them a platform that they can basically take advantage of all of the heavy lifting that we've done to build these artificial intelligence engines to solve their problem, right? And they may say, I need to use absorption spectroscopy in this particular range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Great, fine. Leverage our AI. We'll help you build the solutions for it, right? We want to be the platform which drives spectral intelligence, right? That's what we're really looking to do, and allowing companies to really take advantage of the capabilities of correlation, right? Of all these different disparate types of data to, again, understand not necessarily just the what, but the how and the why. That's really where we're aiming to get to, right? It's not to be a food testing company per se, or a medical device company per se, but back-end spectral intelligence platform.
Amazing. I love it. That's a perfect place to wrap up the conversation here. Before we do wrap, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with you in your journey, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Oh, they can go to www.hyperspectral.ai and they can find us there. They can also find us on LinkedIn. We do a lot of information disseminated on that platform as well.
Amazing. Matt, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Brett. You have a great day.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.